The UK's economy is facing a complex conundrum, with inflation soaring to unprecedented heights, while the overall growth seems to be plateauing. So, what does this mean for you and your financial future? For many, this could mean tough times ahead as they struggle to make ends meet, businesses face uncertain futures, and the country faces significant economic challenges. In this video, we will examine the reasons behind this economic trend, how it may impact you and your finances, and what the UK government is doing to mitigate these issues. Join us as we explore the current state of the UK's economy, the potential ramifications, and what you can do to protect yourself in these uncertain times. The UK economy has been dealing with a difficult and complicated scenario as inflation rates surge to unprecedented levels and the economy's overall growth appears to be plateauing. The sustainability of the UK's economic development and stability has been questioned by economists, policymakers, and individuals alike in light of this occurrence. The gradual increase in the cost of goods and services, known as inflation, reduces the purchasing power of money. Contrarily, economic growth is the gradual increase in production of products and services, which enhances a nation's overall wealth and well-being. Inflation rates have been rising quickly in the UK economy, while economic growth has remained flat, which is an unusual trend. Since the start of the COVID-19 epidemic, inflation rates in the UK have increased. The inflation rate reached its highest point in more than 2 years in April of 2021. Experts have given a number of causes for this spike, including disruptions in the supply chain, increased commodity prices, and an increase in demand as the economy starts to recover. But as the cost of living rises, affecting people's budgets and purchasing power, growing inflation rates have raised concerns among people and businesses. At the same time, the UK's economic expansion has slowed. Brexit-related uncertainty, supply chain interruptions, and a decline in consumer demand are the causes of this slowdown. For both individuals and governments, this confluence of rising prices and declining economic development poses a special dilemma. It calls into question the sustainability of the UK's economic development and stability over the long term, the solutions required to address these problems, and the effects on enterprises, people, and the nation at large. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, predicts that the UK will have one of the worst years among developed nations' major economies this year. According to the report, the UK economy would be the poorest among the G20's 20 largest economies in 2023, which also includes Russia, which is now under sanctions. The IMF expects the UK economy to contract this year, which is a little improvement above its previous prediction. Additionally, it foresees rocky roads ahead for the world financial system. It comes after the failure of 2 US banks last month, which was swiftly followed by competitor UBS's hasty acquisition of Swiss banking giant Credit Suisse, raising concerns about the possibility of a new financial crisis. The UK was predicted to undergo a slump this year by the IMF and finish last among the G7, a grouping of the 7 biggest so-called advanced economies that control trade and the global financial system. During the pandemic comeback in 2022, the UK led the group. The UK economy is now anticipated to contract by 0.3% in 2023 before expanding by 1% the following year. The IMF's most recent prognosis is marginally better than its earlier expectation of a 0.6% reduction issued in January, even though the UK is expected to have the poorest economic performance this year. British susceptibility to high gas prices, rising interest rates, and a slow trade performance have all been cited by IMF experts as contributing factors to the country's poor economic performance. The purpose of forecasts is to provide a general indication of what is most likely to occur in the future, although they're not always accurate. For instance, a review of global recessions between 1992 and 2014 by the IMF found that earlier projections only correctly predicted less than 10% of them a year in advance. The UK's Chancellor Jeremy Hunt stated in response to the most recent IMF forecasts that our IMF growth forecasts have been upgraded by more than any other G7 country. We are currently on the correct path for economic growth, according to the IMF. By following the strategy, we will reduce inflation by more than half this year, relieving pressure on everyone. However, Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed that the projections demonstrated just how far we continue to lag behind on the global stage. This is important not only because the Tories' 13 years of slow development have weakened our economy, but also because it explains why families are struggling have to pay a mortgage penalty, and are witnessing the fastest decline in living standards in recorded history, she continued. The estimate, according to Sarah Olney of the Liberal Democrats in the Treasury, is yet another damning indictment of this Conservative government's record on the economy. Many forecasts believe there is less risk of a UK recession this year. When an economy contracts for 2 consecutive 3-month periods, it is typically said to be in a recession. Currently, the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility anticipates a 0.2% contraction of the GDP this year, but not a recession. Andrew Bailey, Governor of the Bank of England, recently stated that he was much more hopeful for the economy and that it was no longer on the verge of entering a recession. The world economy is still recovering from the epidemic and the energy shock caused by the Ukraine war as the new forecasts are being made. The current instability in the global banking markets, however, has raised fears about the wider impact, according to the IMF. The IMF now anticipates that global growth would decrease from 3.4% in 2022 to 2.8% in 2023, before gradually increasing and levelling off at 3% in 5 years. However, it issued a warning that the global economy would contract even more this year if there is increased banking sector stress. The IMF stated that due to poor productivity and aging populations, real interest rates, which account for inflation, are expected to decline to pre-pandemic levels in major economies. To combat the price increases, sometimes known as inflation, central banks in the UK, the US, Europe, and other countries have been raising interest rates. Because of rising energy prices and rising food prices, inflation in the UK is at its highest level in almost 40 years. The Bank of England responded by boosting interest rates, which were raised to 4.25% last month. And in contrast, the IMF stated in a blog post that recent increases in real interest rates are likely to be temporary. Recession fears are likely to stalk the UK for some time, warned Suren Thiru, Director of Economics at ICAEW. The boost to incomes from easing inflation and lower energy bills is substantially offset by rising taxes and the lagging effect of hiking interest rates, Thiru continued. Hunt's claim that the economic picture is looking better is quite some suspension of disbelief, according to Charles Hepworth, Investment Director at GAM Investments, considering the circumstances. The ONS confirmed that the UK is the final major economy to have returned to pre-COVID output levels. The Brexit-related loss of trade and the high levels of economic activity brought on by the frequency of long-term illness are only 2 of the distinct causes that economists have identified as fueling this sluggishness. A large portion of the population is still struggling with rising costs of living, as inflation continues to outstrip wage growth, heightening the risk of more strikes. It's hard to see where any meaningful recovery in growth is going to come from, and the stagnant picture painted in today's numbers very much looks as if it will be the norm for the foreseeable future, said Stuart Cole, chief macroeconomist at Equity. Real incomes still continue to fall, households face significantly higher tax bills this year, and interest rates look set to rise further. Thank you for watching this video on the current state of the UK economy. As we've discussed, the economy seems to be flattening, inflation is reaching new heights, and this could have significant implications for businesses and individuals across the country. What do you think the government should do to address these issues? Do you have any predictions for how the economy might evolve in the coming months? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below.